Did you know that the COVID pandemic started right here in this city? Yep, this is Wuhan, China. And honestly, it's beautiful. When most Americans hear the word Wuhan, there's probably one thing that immediately comes to mind: COVID. And that makes sense. Wuhan became known around the entire world after the first recognized outbreak of the COVID 19 was identified right here in late 2019. For a lot of us in America, that was basically our introduction to this city. Suddenly, Wuhan was everywhere. It was on the news, it was all over social media. People were talking about it constantly. And at the time, this place seemed so far away. But now, many years later, I'm actually here in the city where COVID all began. I'm walking through the streets of Wuhan, China. And I have to say, this is not the image of Wuhan that I had in my head. Tonight, I'm walking through one of the city's busiest pedestrian areas, and there are people everywhere. You have families out walking around, couples, groups of friends, people shopping, eating, and taking pictures. There are restaurants packed with people, stores on every side of you, street food, huge signs, giant screens, and there is just so much happening at once. And one of the first things that I notice is how alive everything feels. Coming here as an American, I really didn't know what to expect. You hear so much about China back at home, and depending on what you're watching or reading, you can end up with a certain picture in your head of what being here is going to be like. But then you actually get here, and you're just surrounded by people living their normal lives. People are laughing. Kids are running around. People are taking selfies. Everybody's deciding what they want to eat and where they want to go into. It's just normal life. Except the surroundings are pretty incredible because during the day, these buildings are already impressive. But at night, the entire place transforms. You look down the street and the buildings are completely lit up. There are lights everywhere. Some of the older looking buildings have this beautiful architecture. And then right next to them, you have these bright modern signs with massive LED lights. And somehow it all just works together. Every direction you look, there's something going on. You almost don't know where to point the camera at. And I think this is the Wuhan that a lot of people outside of China will never get to see. Because before coming here, even I only knew about Wuhan because of the pandemic. Of course, I knew it was a major city in China. But if you had asked me to picture downtown Wuhan at night, I honestly wouldn't have known what to imagine. And I promise you, it definitely wasn't this. And there's something almost surreal about standing here when you think back to 2020, because for a period of time, Wuhan was probably one of the most talked about cities on earth. You could turn on the TV in America and hear the word Wuhan. You could open up your phone and see Wuhan, and millions of people who had never heard of the city suddenly knew its name. Then, not long after that, our life started to change. Schools closed, businesses shut down, people stayed home, flights were canceled, and masks became part of everyday life. And something that initially seemed like it was happening in some distant city on the other side of the world suddenly affected everybody. So actually standing here right now feels so strange because instead of seeing Wuhan through a television screen, I'm actually here. I'm hearing the sounds of the city. I'm walking through these streets. I'm seeing all these lights. I'm watching thousands of people go about their night, and it gives you a completely different perspective. Obviously, visiting Wuhan today doesn't erase what happened here. COVID affected people around the world, and the people living here experienced the beginning of that crisis firsthand. But at the same time, Wuhan is much more than one singular event. This is a massive city with millions of people who call it home. It has its own culture, its own food, its own history, and most importantly, its own personality. And that's something that's easy to forget when you've only seen this place through headlines. When you actually come here, you start noticing all of the things that don't make international news. You notice how the city looks at night. You notice how crowded the shopping streets get. You notice what people are eating, the architecture, the families walking together, the little alleyways, the stores, the street vendors, just everyday life. And as an American visiting China, I think that's one of the most interesting things about traveling here, because there's a big difference between hearing about a place and actually experiencing. You can see pictures, you can watch the news, you can even watch videos like this one. But when you're actually standing in the middle of it, surrounded by the people who live here, it's hard to understand what a place really feels like. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to come to Wuhan. I wanted to see it for myself, not just the Wuhan that became famous around the world in 2020, but the Wuhan that exists today. And so far, this city has surprised me. The crowds, the lights, the buildings, the energy. There's so much more happening here than I ever expected. And if you're watching this from around the world and the only thing you've ever associated with the word Wuhan is COVID, I get it. That was pretty much my association with it too. But now that I'm actually here, I think it's worth seeing the other side of the city because Wuhan isn't just a place from a news story. It isn't just a fairy tale. It's a real live city. A city with millions of people who live here, millions of people who have their own lives, families, jobs, routines, and stories. And tonight, walking through these streets and seeing all of this for myself, I feel like I'm finally getting to see a side of Wuhan that no one knew existed. So, take a look around. This is Wuhan, China, a city almost everybody in America has heard of, but only very few of us who actually know. And there is a lot more to Wuhan than I ever realized. So let me be the first to welcome you to the city where it all started. Welcome to Wuhan, China.